I already took a look at the Yuka Mini from Mammotion last year. Today we're going to check out its successor, the Yuka Mini 2500. My name is Johannes, welcome to Buhlerland. For those who aren't too familiar with the Mammotion lineup, the Yuka series is basically the smallest variant, and the Yuka Mini 2500 is essentially the smallest model in the Mini Yuka series. And yet its recommended retail price is around 900 euros. Luckily there's a promotion going on right now. The device is currently reduced to 650 euros, and with the discount code I'm showing you here, you can save another about 30 euros. So if this ends up being something for you, feel free to use the code and the link at the end of the video and go for it. In the box, along with the robot itself, you also get a charging station and a small accessory pack. Included are the usual items like replacement blades, a screwdriver, and also the ground anchors. And the typical things you'd expect. What's nice is that there's also a special oil for the wheels or something like that. Of course, I haven't used that yet since I've only just started using the device, but it's definitely nice that Mammotion includes that. Something else you should know right away, compared to Mammotion's larger Luba series with the Yuka series, you have to make a few compromises, especially with the Yuka Mini 2500. Of course, it doesn't have all-wheel drive, it's purely rear-wheel drive, and there's also no LiDAR scanner on top. Instead, it basically uses an AI True Vision camera system. There are 3 cameras built in, which it uses for complete navigation and obstacle detection. What's also not included here, but was in the previous model from last year, are the Inavi RTK functions. With those, you could navigate using a reference station via RTK. None of that is present here, but you don't need it, and it's not absolutely necessary. We'll come back to that later. Just a quick note about the installation itself. You receive the package, take the robot out, and it's basically ready to go. You just need to remove a few stickers if they bother you, but you don't have to screw anything on, like with the Luba series, for example, where you still have to attach bumpers at the front or the side panels or anything like that. So basically you can get started right away. The only thing you have to do is when you set up the charging station, there's the base plate and then there's basically the charging pad, and you have to fasten 2 screws there. But overall, everything is wonderfully and clearly explained in Mammotion's step-by-step instructions, which greet you as soon as you open the packaging. After we then installed the charging station, the next step is to set up the robot. This is also all done through the Mammotion app, basically. The actual setup took just 1 or 2 minutes, so it goes super quickly. And basically all you really have to do is install the robot that pops up in your Mammotion app, give it your Wi-Fi password so it has that, and then you can expect that you'll need to install a firmware update. And then you're pretty much ready to go. And as I already mentioned, you don't need to set up any fancy ATK antenna or anything like that, or worry about the placement of your charging station. Just put the thing wherever you have space, wherever you have a power connection. I mean, the charging cable is still, I think, about 5 meters or so. So you don't have to set up your charging station right next to a power outlet. But as I said, it's relatively straightforward and done in a few minutes. Once you finish setting it up in the app, the next step is, of course, to map out the area. That's basically always the essence of all robot mowers when you get started. And that's really nice. Now with the Yuka Mini 2 series, there's also an auto mapping function. So you no longer have to drive it around manually, and it's also no longer just a semi-automatic process, where it basically has to feel its way along walls and fences. Instead, it can really do this completely autonomously. Of course, it's always ideal, especially if you have a garden that's enclosed by fences, doors, or walls, or something like that. In those cases, it works even better. If you have an open area like that, then you need to consider whether it really makes sense, or whether you should maybe block off certain sections so you can first create a small map, which you can then gradually expand step by step. But basically, you start the auto mapping function, and especially if you have a small garden, it will make its rounds. And at some point, it's done and returns to the charging station. And if the area is larger, then it will go back to charge and continue afterwards. But as I said, basically, it's all very straightforward. And as mentioned, it looks around without mowing, and accordingly, it goes relatively quickly. What you should definitely do is keep in mind that there's always a difference between manually guiding the robot along the boundaries and letting it do it automatically. Of course, there are always a few inaccuracies or not. Clear boundaries. Or, for example, if you have any flower beds that are level with the ground and you don't want them to be mowed, then you should take another look at the map and check exactly where the robot would normally drive. And if in doubt, just set up a no-go zone there, or the virtual boundary or something like that, because it doesn't take that into account for now. For it, a flower bed is the same as a clump of grass or something similar. So you should take another look there to avoid any unpleasant surprises. But basically, it's really simple. You can set it up directly on the map, just like with a vacuum robot, by drawing it in. You can also theoretically drive it manually, but as I said, you can do everything from the app, and that's really nice. Many other manufacturers still have the problem that the robot has to drive there, and you basically have to drive along the no-go zone so it remembers it, or something like that. But here, it's really just drag it and drop to draw it, and you're done. Let's maybe move on to the topic of mowing performance. And of course, that's always the most important thing with robotic mowers. What can it actually do? What you need to be aware of is that the Yuka Mini is relatively small. Accordingly, it only has one cutting disc, so the cutting width will not be huge, like for example with the Luba 3 Pro, which I'm testing in parallel. That one, of course, has 2 blades, so it can mow a lot more area at once. And accordingly, it also moves forward faster when it comes to covering large areas. As for the cutting height, you can set it between 20 and 60 millimeters. There's a small dial on top that lets you adjust it nicely. That works reliably, and otherwise, once the thing is running, it just runs, and you'll get a nice clean pattern. That was already the case with a Yuka Mini of the previous generation, so you really don't have to worry about it. It keeps its line, it does a proper job, and since it doesn't use RTK, it's actually quite autonomous. Even if you're in an area with poor reception or where it's covered, with trees or anything else, it has absolutely no problems. What you should keep in mind, I already mentioned it, no all-wheel drive, only rear-wheel drive. The tires are relatively large. I think Mammotion specifies up to 45 degrees or 40 degrees of incline, if I remember correctly. That's about what it can handle without any issues. But if it gets too steep, so those 80% inclines or so that the all-wheel drive Luba 3 AWD can handle, this one can't. It often has the problem that either the wheels spin or it tips backward, standing there like a little beetle. But that's an issue many robots with rear-wheel drive have if they're not heavy enough. You can try to counteract this a bit by attaching some weights to the front, but I don't think that's really the point of the whole thing. So if you have steep inclines, then this might not be the right robot for you. Another interesting topic is obstacle detection. The previous version already had a kind of true AI camera, but I think there were only 2 cameras or so. And when mowing, I kept running into the issue that every now and then certain areas right in the middle of a mowed field were left unmowed. And there it was almost like a kind of patch. It was standing there even though it was just regular grass. I haven't had that issue here at all. At least I haven't noticed it so far. And it definitely also detects smaller obstacles. So if you have a small ball, a little ball, a hedgehog or something like that, it actually recognizes it and drives around it in a nice arc without running it over. So in that respect, I was positively surprised, especially since it doesn't use a sensor bar or anything like that. But in any case, it worked quite well with the True Vision camera. Let's move on to the conclusion. So who is this robot actually for? And I can say quite clearly, if you have a small garden, like in a row house, a semi-detached house, or something similar that isn't particularly complicated in layout, or something like that, and you simply want to save yourself from having to mow the lawn manually, then the Yuka Mini could definitely be something for you. Set it down, let it map the area like a vacuum or mopping robot. You really don't have to invest much time in it. Maybe set up a virtual fence or a no-go zone here and there, and then it does its job diligently and without any problems. It's also relatively quiet, mainly because it only has a cutting disc or something similar. So that's definitely a big plus, especially if you live in a densely populated area or something like that. And where it could also be interesting is, for example, if you don't have, or simply if you have RTK reception, or if you basically have to place the charging station in a spot that's covered or something like that, where you would have RTK issues, then this could definitely be a relevant topic. The only thing you have to keep in mind is that this is, of course, a camera-controlled robot. When it gets dark, then it doesn't do much anymore because the camera can't see anything. That's the difference compared to the LiDAR robots. They have LiDAR laser scanners so they can see even in the dark. For them, day and night are basically the same. But the thing doesn't necessarily have to run at night anyway. It's enough if you run it early in the morning or in the early afternoon or something like that. So that's something to keep in mind, but in general, you shouldn't run it at night anyway because of nocturnal animals like hedgehogs and so on. But as I said, I have to say, in principle, it's definitely suitable for these small gardens. In my scenario here at home, of course, it quickly reached its limits with the slope and things like that, where it regularly broke down or something like that. But as I said, if you have a normal flat garden, it can even be a bit bigger. It doesn't necessarily have to be 500 square meters. Even if it's bigger, then If in doubt, the robot just goes back, recharges, and simply continues mowing. That works reliably, so you don't need to worry about it. And with that, I'm done for now. Do you have any questions about the Yuka Mini 2500? Feel free to leave them in the comments. And if you've stuck around until now, let me know in the comments what kind of robotic lawnmower you currently have or which one you're planning to get. And don't forget to leave a thumbs up, subscribe, and show some hype. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful day. Soon there will also be a video about the Luba 3AWD. If you're interested in that, see you soon. Ciao, ciao.